In our headlines on this Friday afternoon, February 24th. Ukraine marks 1 year of Russian invasion today, and in light of this grim anniversary, the United Nations passes a resolution for peace in Ukraine, free from violence. North Korea claims it conducted long-range cruise missile tests on Thursday as South Korea and the U.S. engaged in a tabletop exercise at the Pentagon against a potential nuclear attack. Meanwhile, a senior U.S. official says Washington is likely to limit South Korea's production of advanced semiconductors in China amid the Biden administration's tech war with Beijing. The world today marks 1 year of Russia's aggression in Ukraine. And on the eve of this grim anniversary, the United Nations voted in favor of Moscow ceasing its callous campaign against Kyiv. Our Shin Se-byuk starts us off.
On the eve of the first anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war, the UN General Assembly on Thursday voted overwhelmingly to approve a resolution calling for an end to Russian aggression against Ukraine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 141. Against, 7. Abstentions, 32. Draft resolution A/ES11/L7 is adopted.
Among those voting against were Belarus, Russia, and North Korea. Most of the abstentions came from Africa and Central Asia, including China and India. The non-binding resolution endorses Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, rejecting any Russian claims to parts of the country occupied by Moscow. The UN also demanded the immediate, complete, and unconditional withdrawal of Russian military forces. With no end to the war in sight, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned China of consequences if Beijing provided material support for Moscow.
Any Chinese military support for Russia in this conflict, or for that matter, the systematic evasion of sanctions, would be a serious problem for the relationship between the United States and China.
NATO also voiced concerns, saying the history of war would only repeat if Beijing gives any support to Moscow.
This is part of a pattern, Georgia 2008, Donbass, Crimea 2014, and then the full-fledged invasion last year. We need to ensure that we break the cycle of Russian aggression.
There was no immediate comment from China. But Beijing's foreign ministry said early Thursday that any potential intelligence regarding such support was just speculation. Meanwhile, in a joint press conference with the Spanish Prime Minister Thursday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he has yet to see the peace plan promised by China. Beijing promised to publish its political solution to the Ukraine conflict this week in time for the 1-year anniversary of the war. Zelensky, however, said it is a good sign that China started talking about Ukraine and that he would like to meet with Beijing about the proposal before assessing it. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the international community is set to share a fresh framework of sanctions on Russia. Details will be unveiled during a virtual Group of 7 meeting scheduled for this Friday, including the leaders of the U.S. and Japan. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will also be taking part in the virtual talks. Within the new sanctions are plans to slash by half Russia's oil revenues. Also, the U.S. State Department says some 200 Russian individuals and institutions will be subject to the sanctions, as well as a few Chinese entities that are allegedly assisting Moscow. And while the international community ponders broader punitive measures against Moscow, the plight of the people in Ukraine persists as they strive to survive a rampant Russian assault. Our Moon Hye-ryun covers the past year of warfare and the prospects ahead.
I decided to conduct a special military operation. It aims to protect people who have been bullied and subjected to genocide by the Kyiv regime for 8 years.
February 24, 2022. With these words, Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a full military offensive to overthrow the Ukrainian government headed by President Volodymyr Zelensky. Western countries and their leaders responded immediately with a wave of economic sanctions and condemnation.
There is absolutely no evidence that Ukraine posed a threat to Russia that would justify Ukraine's invasion. And that is why the United Nations General Assembly also regarded the invasion of Ukraine by Russia as unlawful under international law.
However, Russian forces marched on and took control of regions bordering Russia and along the coastline. The action was met by Ukrainian resistance, aided by Western-supplied weapons. Ukraine retook much of the northeastern Kharkiv region, damaged the Kerch Strait Bridge, a crucial supply route linking Crimea with Russia, and pushed Russian troops away from the city of Kherson. But the Kremlin declared the annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions: Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. While little territorial gains were made, the war has had a devastating impact on people's lives. The war claimed the lives of an estimated 40,000 civilians and resulted in 8 million refugees across Europe alone, making it the fastest-growing refugee crisis since the Second World War. Russian attacks have resulted in at least $350 billion worth of property damage. Despite the brutal humanitarian and economic impacts the war has had, it looks as though negotiations to bring an end to the war are unlikely to happen anytime soon.
Both sides they would only be interested in sitting at a negotiating table if they have some advantages from participating in negotiations, or if they believe that they are in a position to make concessions.
In the meantime, Ukraine has stepped up its bid for military aid, including fighter jets, and further economic sanctions on Russia from the international community, not just its Western allies.
So I think a long-term perspective of any foreign government is to provide Ukrainian government with as much assistance, in particular military assistance, to help its defend war effort.
A year into the war, Kyiv remains standing, but whether it can continue to do so is in the hands of more than just Ukraine and Russia. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee amid Russia's invasion, and those of Korean descent have made the long journey here to the land of their forefathers. Our Choi Soo-young has their story.
Over the past 2 decades, Central Asians of Korean descent, known as Korea-U.S, have been making this neighborhood in Gwangju home. Most of them are descendants of Korean independence activists who moved to the Soviet Union during the Japanese occupation of Korea. With the outbreak of war in Ukraine last year, the village has also become a sanctuary for Ukrainians of Korean descent fleeing the conflict. From March last year, Korean village in Gwangju started raising funds for flight tickets to bring them to South Korea. This accelerated when the Justice Ministry simplified the visa issuance process for Korea-U.S. According to the village, they brought 875 people in total from Ukraine by February 12th this year. In the past year, they have been building a new life in Korea, just like their ancestors did in Eurasia around 100 years ago. Eleanor, who came in April last year, thought it was a miracle to live in the village.
I work as a staff member at the Center for the Village with support from representatives Shin Jo-ya and Lee Chun-young.
As the war in Ukraine shows no sign of ending, it is important that the Korean children get an education. Children walk toward their dreams by learning Korean at the village's Youth Culture Center.
I want to be a programmer. I like to program something.
However, they need formal documents like an academic transcript from their school in Ukraine to study at school in South Korea.
I hope both the government and the education office understand the current situation, and the school accepts children without documents like this.
Data from Gwangju YMCA legal support show that most of the Korean work as day laborers. That's because they only have temporary stay visas instead of refugee or overseas Korean visas. Every Monday, dozens of Korean visit the legal support center over working conditions and withheld wages due to the lack of proper employment contracts.
Unpaid wages take the most part of legal consultations and lease agreement issues after that. But I think the biggest problem is unpaid wages.
Living in this country, Korea-in still face many barriers, so they could use more practical help from private companies, civic groups, and government agencies. That would mark a historic new beginning for them at Korea-in Village. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News, Gwangju.
Military authorities from Seoul and their counterparts in Washington engaged in a tabletop exercise at the Pentagon on Wednesday local time, while Pyongyang claims to have conducted cruise missile tests at around the same time, which was early Thursday here in this part of the world. Our defense correspondent Oh Soo-young has more.
South Korea and the United States practice coordinating their response to possible nuclear attacks by North Korea, which in an apparent response claimed it held a missile firing drill. Seoul and Washington released a joint statement on Friday, saying the two sides conducted the Deterrent Strategy Committee's tabletop exercise, or TTX, at the Pentagon on Wednesday local time. Based on the hypothetical scenario of North Korea using nuclear weapons, the senior-level drill involved defense officials, military officers and diplomats discussing possible capabilities and options for the allies. They discussed how to leverage Seoul's non-nuclear capabilities to support Washington's extended deterrence promise of providing support for allies under nuclear or conventional attack. The two sides pledged to hold a tabletop exercise annually and visited the Kings Bay nuclear submarine base in Georgia as a show of unity and readiness to respond to Pyongyang's belligerence. In apparent protest of the exercise, North Korea claims it fired 4 Hwasal-2 cruise missiles into the EC in the early hours of Thursday, which would have coincided with the tabletop exercise held in Washington. It also follows the Allies' joint anti-missile drills with Japan held in the EC on Wednesday, which practiced tracking and intercepting incoming ballistic missiles. The North claimed that the missiles it fired on Thursday traveled 2,000 kilometers, would indicate a range that covers US bases in Japan. With South Korea and the United States set to hold more joint exercises in the weeks to come, experts forecast that North Korea will return to its playbook of using such drills as a pretext for further aggression and weapons testing.
North Korea relies on brinkmanship to engage with South Korea and to the rest of the world. So there's no doubt in my mind that North Korea will be using that tactic in the form of military provocation or some other action that will disturb the tranquility of our society.
A South Korean military official told Arirang News that Seoul's surveillance assets were active when the North reportedly held its missile drill, and the claims made by the North state media are being verified. The Joint Chiefs of Staff said there's a difference between the North's claim and what has been found by South Korean intelligence. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
And in other news now, the Yoon administration has shared an actual export target sum for this year and detailed a roadmap to achieving it. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
$685 billion is South Korean government's goal for exports in 2023. That would be an increase of $1.4 billion from last year, despite economists this year forecasting a decline. This target was announced on Thursday as President Yoon brought together government ministers and business leaders for a meeting and promised more than $1.1 billion from the government in export support.
고금리 등 복합 위기를 돌파하는 길은 오로지 수출과 스타트업 활성화라고 하는 점을 제가 누누이 강조해 왔습니다. 강력한 수출 드라이브를 걸기 위해 각 부처의 수출 전략을 면밀하게 점검하고 개별 부처를 넘어 범부처 간의 협력을 통해 수출 기업을 지원해야 됩니다.
The presidential office also announced that each ministry will have a top export and investment chief who will oversee progress and be in touch with businesses about their needs. In addition, the government has labeled 12 new focus areas for exports. They are divided into 2 categories. One, for the government to work diplomatically to win overseas contracts. Another, for the government to invest in fostering their global strength. Overseas contracts will include nuclear power plants, defense, construction, and green industries. As for items with export potential, they include agriculture, digital content, and healthcare. One of the sectors targeting the biggest growth is agriculture. The government, through smart farms and the popularity of K-food, wants to grow exports to $20 billion by the year 2027, which would be an increase of $8 billion compared to last year.
For this, we will provide further support for growth and exports of products such as high-value-added alternative foods, convenience foods, and cultured meat, while creating funds dedicated to food R&D, food tech, and green bio.
The presidential office also said it will work on expanding the nation's maritime freight infrastructure by at least 30% through smart ports. President Yoon also used the opportunity to remind people of his role as the nation's #1 salesman. He said all diplomatic activities will center around exports and the economy. While promising to be at the forefront, he called on others to join in. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, come late this year, Washington will likely place restrictions on South Korea's production of advanced semiconductors in China as part of its export controls on chips. Our Lee Seung-jae has details.
South Korean chip makers Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix may not be able to produce semiconductors beyond a certain level of technology in their factories in China in the near future. Speaking at a forum hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security Alan Estevez said Thursday that Washington will likely limit the level of advanced semiconductors produced by South Korean companies in China. The move is part of Washington's plans to prevent advanced technology from getting into the wrong hands. However, Estevez says the U.S. is also working closely with South Korean companies to help minimize the potential damage to their businesses in China. This comes as Washington announced export control measures for companies producing semiconductors in China last October, while allowing a one-year grace period for Samsung and SK Hynix factories in China. However, in October this year, when the grace period ends, it will likely restrict semiconductor production in China. While the South Korean government and the Korean companies will demand another extension of the semiconductor export control moratorium, pundits say the latest remarks from the U.S. official indicate that the two major chip makers will not receive a further exemption from the measures. Estevez argued in favor of strict measures against the production of such technology in China, saying that in a world where technology is the driver of military power, cutting-edge critical technologies such as semiconductors are central. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Korea's southern port city of Busan is playing host to the country's annual drone show, which organizers say is the largest in Asia. Arirang was there.
Military drones, drones that detect gas leaks, and drones used for deliveries. It's Asia's largest drone exhibition, the 2023 Drone Show Korea. Hosted by the Trade Ministry, the three-day event kicked off on Thursday in the city of Busan with the latest trends in urban air mobility, or UAM. Korean Urban Air Mobility, also dubbed KUAM, is a project that tests the vehicle's safety and traffic management functions with the aim of commercialization in 2025. The Land Ministry earlier on Tuesday announced that it will conduct an operational demonstration in August with 46 companies and consortiums. Here you can check out drones that are being tested by the government who are looking to commercialize the sector in the near future. One company that has been making a concerted effort to develop its UAM business is telecommunications giant SK Telecom. It has an MOU with the Land Ministry to take part in the government-led demonstration program. Here it showcases its mobilized robot and live-cast drone video system, which can transmit the video from the drone's camera in real time.
We provide remote control solutions in robots and drones to around 90 client companies. Further from drones, body-mounted cameras, and smartphones, we expanded the business into AI robots this year and even added gas leak detection and thermal imaging options.
The country's national carrier, Korean Air, introduces drones from its aerospace business division, such as its medium-altitude unmanned aerial vehicle, which only 4 countries around the world possess. It's equipped with a high-tech sensor that can monitor targets at higher altitudes. Korean Air has also developed drones that inspect the exteriors of its aircraft to check for any safety issues. Not just private companies, but South Korea's defense ministry also presents AI-based drone robot combat systems that can be utilized on land, in the air, or at sea. The Defense Acquisition Program Administration is working to boost its weapons drone business. In a roadmap released by the Land Ministry, the global UAM market is forecasted to grow to $10.9 billion in 2025, over $61 billion in 2030, before reaching up to $609 billion in 2040. The domestic market is expected to be at over $10 billion, producing more than $17 billion worth of economic effect, while creating jobs for around 160,000 people. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News, Busan.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Starting with an update on the disgraced movie producer Harvey Weinstein, who was handed an extra 16 years in prison by a Los Angeles court on Thursday local time. This after jurors convicted the 70-year-old on 3 counts of rape and sexual assault against a single victim. Weinstein is already serving a 23-year prison sentence handed down from a New York court in 2020. On the same day, jailed R&B singer R. Kelly was also handed a longer prison sentence. A Chicago federal court sentenced him to 20 years on charges of child pornography and enticement of a minor. 19 of those 20 years will be served concurrently, effectively meaning he will spend 1 extra year behind bars on top of the 30 years he was already serving for racketeering and sex trafficking charges. Moving on to China now, where rescue efforts are underway following the collapse of a mine in Inner Mongolia. According to local authorities on Thursday, at least 6 people have been killed, another 6 injured, and over 40 are still missing. State media says the incident occurred on Wednesday local time when a 180-meter tall open-pit coal mine wall collapsed on top of miners. 900 rescue workers have been dispatched, but search efforts were initially hampered by an additional landslide. Chinese authorities have since launched an investigation into the cause of the incident, and some people have reportedly been detained. The mine is run by the Inner Mongolia Xinjiang coal industry, which was fined last year over several safety violations. Meanwhile, the European Commission has banned TikTok on its employees' devices. The organization made the ban official on Thursday, saying that the short video social media platform poses cybersecurity threats. The ban covers official devices handed to staff and personal devices too, if they have work-related applications installed. Employees have been given until March 15th to remove TikTok. The move marks the first time that the EU has barred its employees from using an app. The ban comes as TikTok has faced increasing scrutiny over allegations that it collects users' private data for use by the Chinese government. But TikTok says that the ban is based on a misconception of the app and has denied sharing information with Chinese officials. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. We are having warmer than average temperatures, but it's that very unpleasant dust that's covered most parts of Korea. So please have a face mask that can filter fine dust today. Then better airflow will help to push away that dust in the air from the capital region from late this afternoon. Meanwhile, east of Gangwon-do province is forecast to receive heavy snowfall into tomorrow, with up to 15 centimeters of snowfall expected. Parts of Gyeongsang-pukdo, Ulleung-do, Dokdo could see up to 8 centimeters of heavy snowfall as well. So please be well prepared for the snow and stay safe. Afternoon temperatures are similar to slightly lower than yesterday, hovering slightly above seasonal norms in most parts. Sunny skies are blurred with that fine dust today. Well, other than east of Gangwon-do province, the rest of the country will be under sunny skies this weekend, but turning colder briefly in the mornings. That much more spring-like conditions are in the forecast for next week. With that in mind, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And those are the headlines at this hour, but do stay with us for our panel session coming up right after this break. Thank you for now.